Hello, Ciarán. Great to see you. Thank you again for taking time to catch us up. It's really such a helpful exercise to catch up once a month with these video updates. How are you today?
Oh, I'm all good, and today I'm rocking a Rocklands GAA jersey.
Excellent.
Yeah, so I'm representing upstate New York and Pearl River
Yeah,
and Rocklands, a great GAA club, and the road where the club is on is called Bobby Sands Way.
that's right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so it's great to be there. Yeah, so everything's going well here. Training today, but we can't complain. We've had about 4 weeks of really good sunny weather. So
Yeah, one of your recent letters from Ireland captured that well. The buskers and the cafes and everything there out on the streets of Dublin sounded perfect.
yeah, oh, the place is buzzing, and it's one day of rain I can take. It'll keep the
Yeah,
keep the grass green for us.
that's right. Well, let's jump in if it's all right with you to get some updates. There's a lot of news in different corners of this. What is the latest on legacy legislation? Can you give us an update on where we are, the timeline, and I think most importantly, what actions can be taken to stop this?
Okay, well, so the latest update is the British government are determined to fire away with this piece of legislation and have it enacted. And as most people know, it basically stops people who are victims of the conflict from accessing the courts, from having police and judicial investigations, and for even and stopping all inquests. And the inquest bit's just as important as the rest. And it effectively allows people to grant themselves immunity from prosecution in exchange for an untested statement. So it closes down the avenues for families to find out what happened to their loved ones who might have been killed during the conflict. Uh, and it undermines then reconciliation because it just continues a cover up as opposed to having acknowledgement. So they have been very clear that they're going to push ahead with in opposition to the Irish government and just every political party in Ireland
Yeah.
and in Britain, and against the advice and position of the US Congress, the UN, and the EU. So this is a go it alone unilateral action from the British government, and it's with one end in sight, and that is to stop families from gaining access to the role of the British military in killings during the conflict. So this week, the legislation was brought back into the House of Lords. The House of Lords actually moved an amendment which removed the immunity clause. So that took that essential element out of it, because even for British law lords, that was a step beyond.
Yeah.
And the response of the British government was to ignore that and say, well, under their process, it goes back into the Commons, and they will put that clause back in, and it's in the Commons, and then it needs to go back into Lords, and a ping pong between the two houses. So even the British law lords, who are no friends of Ireland, can't even stomach these proposals because they're so egregious. They also added a piece of and it's in my letter, and if people want to sign up to the Friends of Sinn Féin newsletter, they can read about it. They also entered another amendment, which has the very deliberate fact of stopping anybody who was illegally detained in the 1970s from taking a court action. So these are people who were imprisoned without trial, and that the British government didn't even follow their own legal procedures. And people were incarcerated for years on the back of these, and the
Yeah.
British government trying to stop that. So instead of acknowledging how unjust the process was, trying to make redress, there's just steamrolling over the rights of people. And then just in a breaking news piece today, the Scottish government have said, and not to get too much into the weeds of this, Westminster can legislate for England, basically. If they want to apply that law in Scotland or Wales or the North, they need the assent of the local parliament and the local government. The Scottish government and the Scottish parliament have said that they will not extend this legacy legislation into Scotland.
Yeah.
How that plays out remains to be seen, but this British government is very pointedly pursuing this agenda against the advice of all, against their international partners, against the US. And also it cuts across and undermines the Good Friday Agreement. So that's where we are. And Greg, if you could just indulge me for 1 minute, because there was a story today that just broke. And
Yeah.
it's to put this in context.
Yeah. Please.
So there was an inquest was held. The inquest was just finalized today. And as a number of new inquests have been started in different historical killings, and the British government are trying to close those down. And this is the reason why. In 1975, there was a young lad in Belfast called Leo Norney. He was 17 and he was on his way to meet his girlfriend. And he was shot and killed by a soldier from the Black Watch Regiment of the British Army. And you called the guy McKay, who'd shot him, dead. The British soldiers then covered up and said that he was a gunman. This guy, Leo Norney, was a gunman who'd opened fire on their patrol. None of it was true. There was an inquest in 1976 where the British government's evidence went unchallenged, and they released an open verdict, as in no one could tell what the cause of death was. It has taken that family until today to have that case renewed. And what was found out in court was this guy McKay had served a sentence for a very violent assault, had been released from prison, was allowed to go back to his regiment, and was back in the streets of Belfast. And 2 months later, he shot dead Leo Norney. And it was one of his patrol members gave evidence to say that the original story had been made up. But not only that, this guy McKay had went out that day and told his patrol that he was going to kill somebody. So that has taken all of these years to get to this point. And that is what the British government are trying to close down. Inquests which get to the truth about what happened to people's loved ones, and in particular ones that deal with the British Army. The guy McKay is now dead, so there's very little can be done in terms of justice in this. But at least the family know the truth about what has happened, and that the record is now there for everybody to see. That a member of the British Army just decided to shoot and kill somebody in 1975, a 17-year-old on the streets of Belfast. And it's taken to 2023 for that truth to come out.
The truth to come out. And I think that, and as an awful story, I think that is at the heart of in one of the ways that this legislation is so egregious. It not only shuts down pursuit of justice or any sort of retribution, or that's not even the word, some sort of adjudication. It shuts down just truth finding. It shuts down answering the question, what actually happened here? And that's really overwhelmingly awful.
Yeah. So that's the very practical pieces, and that's the reason why it's so, as we've said, so egregious. But it undermines that whole process of peace building and reconciliation and acknowledgement. So that is the sole focus and the sole driving piece behind this. It is the British government trying to protect their own. Now, they can't be allowed to get away with that.
What is the timeline? What does it look like? How close are they to bringing it back to the Commons, to add an amendment to bring it back to Lords? What is it looking like now?
Well, they have made it clear that they want this legislation enacted by the end of July, which is the Westminster recess.
Okay.
How that can get done, I'm not quite sure about the vagaries of their process, but that is their intent. And it may slip back into September. But the key thing is they need to just stop these proposals. They need to get back to what was agreed to Stormont House. They need to get back to working with the Irish government as partners and the other parties, but most importantly, they need to respect the rights of victims of this conflict, the truths, to find out what actually happened. And
that's what families are asking for, to know what happened to their loved ones and family members. And to that end, there is action that can be taken on our social media and our newsletters and on our website to ask our United States senators and representatives to remind the British government, if you value this special partnership, partners and people who work together, honor international agreements and stick to working together with the Irish government, to adhering to what was agreed in 2014 at Stormont House. So there is a path forward, and it's important that we, Irish Americans and Americans who are interested in justice and equity, say this is the path forward. You need to be held account in this way.
Absolutely. And the ask is very straightforward, and it's not something that is above and beyond the normal recourse to justice. We're just asking the British government to honour their agreements, honour their commitments, and do the right thing by victims. And the US has a strong role to play in that, at Congress and the administration, in almost as a critical friend to Britain to say this is undermining your credibility
That's
internationally.
right.
It's an issue for our relationship, and just go back and do the right thing.
Speaking of the timeline of that legislation, could you share with us a little bit of an insight into a timeline of upcoming elections? I know that we had in May the local council elections in the north, and a year before that assembly elections. I'm not sure we're through the thick of it as far as elections go. There are a whole bunch on the horizon. Can you describe what might be coming up?
Yeah, we have plenty of elections coming up next year and the year after. So I suppose, unlike the US, we do not have fixed terms for elections for some of them. So some of them are vague, as in they have to be held before this date,
I see.
but the government can make a call on them. But I suppose, realistically speaking, we would expect EU and local government elections in the south by May, June of next year.
Okay.
So that's going to be, and that's across all 26 counties, and it sends people to the European Parliament and the local government, which is essential for delivering services here. All the speculation is there could be a Westminster election in the autumn or the fall of next year.
Wow.
I'm just trying to translate for Americans and
yes,
Canadians.
Thank you.
In the fall of next year, and that will be to elect a new British government and also then to elect local MPs, and that's solely in the 6 counties.
I see.
So we're an all-Ireland party, so we fight elections north and south. So
yeah.
we could expect at least 3 elections next year, and then the following first half of the 2025, there will have to be an Irish government general election by March of 2025. Again, that could happen in the fall of next year.
Yeah.
It could happen at any time, but it has to be before March 2025. And then there'll be an Irish presidential election. I think it has to be by June of next year, or June of 2025. So it'll be another full presidential election as well. And unfortunately, Irish citizens living abroad have not been given the right to vote in the presidential election. So if you were living in Dublin, Greg, you can vote in a US presidential election. In fact, a couple of months ago, there's a great picture of Brazilians in Dublin voting up to queuing up to vote in the Brazilian presidential election. Irish citizens living outside the state don't have that right. So there's an issue there for future elections. We would like to see Irish citizens in the US and Canada being able to vote.
That's right. So that's MP elections, MEP elections, TDs, and presidential here just in the next 12, 18 months.
Councillors and the MPs.
And councillors, yeah. Wow. So, and if all of our watchers, viewers, and listeners, we'll keep you up to date on all of those elections, how you can help, how you can learn about those elections and candidates in our newsletter and in future video updates.
Yeah, and they will all be crucial because you could have a new British government coming in on the back of it.
That's right.
You could have a new Irish government led by Sinn Féin coming in on the back of it. You could have changes in the European Parliament. You could have changes as well in terms of local government, which is a big issue for the 26 counties.
Certainly.
As well as, of course, a president election. Now, the president and the Irish president is very much a figurehead position, but it's very important in terms of overseeing the constitution and also representing the Irish nation at home and abroad.
That's right. Yeah. Can we move back a little bit into the results of elections? Was it last May or the May before? Where are things standing on the return of the assembly? It feels frustrating, and that probably pales in comparison to what it feels like to be a citizen and working and living there and saying, why don't we have representation? Are there any green shoots? What does it look like right now?
So in January 2022, or in February 2022, the DUP made it clear they were going to collapse the institutions.
Yeah.
So there's been no functioning government or all-Ireland bodies since then. There was an election in May 2022. Sinn Féin emerged as the largest party. By far, the majority of votes went to parties who wanted the government up and running, wanted the institutions of the Good Friday Agreement up and working, including the all-Ireland bodies. The DUP have refused to respect the outcome of that election and have continued to block government formation and block the workings of the North-South Ministerial Council, which is an essential element of the Good Friday Agreement.
Yeah.
So that's the position. They have said that they would review that position once the winds are framework agreement was reached with the EU. That's come and gone. Still no government. They said that they would have a panel who would report on this. That has come and gone.
Yeah.
And we had a local government election. They says that people were speculating that they would review this post the local government election. The local government election is now gone. Sinn Féin emerged by still the largest party by far, and increased our lead, increased our vote. And we're now facing into the summer with having no government in place and no functioning North-South ministerial council or bodies. And you have to ask the question, what are the two governments doing about this?
Yeah.
Because the British and Irish government are meant to be joint partners, securing, guaranteeing and overseeing the operation of the Good Friday Agreement. It's not their agreement. This was passed in a referendum.
The people's, the people passed.
Yeah, it is the people's agreement. They're just the guarantors of it at this time.
Right.
And that agreement isn't functioning. The institutions in the North aren't meeting, and the North-South Ministerial Council and all Ireland bodies aren't operating to their full potential. So there's speculation that something could happen in September, but that means we're a full summer without having any government yet again. And again, there's no guarantee that those issues will be addressed at all. So for me, what we need is the two governments to actually step forward and say, what are you going to do in the interim? How are you going to operate the North-South Ministerial Council in the interim? How are you going to progress All Ireland working? And how are you going to do what's best and oversee the development and the implementation of the Good Friday Agreement? Yeah. And unfortunately, that's not happening. The British government are still bent on this unilateral approach.
Are there any actions, steps, campaigns, anything that can be done from America? From what are steps or calls to action that are possible?
Well, I think the key bit has to be Congress and the administration and those interested and who support the Good Friday Agreement is to ask the British and Irish governments, what are you doing? What are you doing to protect and enhance All Ireland working? Yep. What are you doing to get the institutions up and running? And what are you doing to respect the rights of those citizens in the North who want to see the institutions up and running? So it's very much both governments should be acting as partners that to get the institutions up and running, safeguard All Ireland working. And if the institutions aren't working, what's the plan B?
What's this?
We can't be left in this grey area.
Yeah, that's right. And I thank you very much for that update on all of those key areas. I asked, recently I was traveling in Ohio for the Ohio State AOH and LAOH convention with TD for Mayo, Rose Conway Walsh. And the engagement was through the roof. The curiosity and desire to learn and act was really something to see. We were fortunate enough to have an opportunity to meet with both of the Freedom for All Ireland committees, with the LAOH and the AAOH, to discuss exactly what's going on, exactly where steps can be taken, and to meet with the newly elected presidents of the Ohio AOH is Danny Parks, and in the LAOH it's Nikki Parks. So it's really an exciting time to see Irish America so galvanized, so prepared, and so ready to act. So it was an excellent trip to Ohio, and I'm grateful for all the hospitality and warmth and high level of readiness. It was really an excellent trip.
Yeah, no, and the reports, I met with Rose Conway yesterday. Yeah, and she was buzzing about it, about the reception, about the engagement, and about that sense of hope for the future. We talk a lot about the problems we face today. Yeah, but it is a very clear pathway to United Ireland. Is a very clear pathway to ensure that no British government can ever impose their will on any part of Ireland again, whether that's on Brexit, whether it's on legacy, or whether that is just collapsing institutions and imposing their own positions on it. So all of that is very exciting, and although we are moving in the right direction, it's very slow and frustratingly so. But never underestimate your own ability to create change. Yeah. And Brexit, it was the US that brought the British government to the negotiating table to resolve the issues in Ireland and to protect the Good Friday Agreement and ensure there was no hard border on our island. So the US has a role to play in this. and individuals within the US.
That's right.
And Canada, and I know people in Canada listen. It's the same in Canada. We had a very successful set of tours with John Finucane in Montreal. We had Conor Murphy in Ottawa, and with Louise O'Reilly in Vancouver and Calgary. And people are hungry. They want us to succeed. They want Ireland to succeed. They want our agreements to succeed, and they want to know what role they can play in that.
I think that's right. It's an enthusiasm and a hope that they're channeling into action and movement, and that really is an exciting time. So it was really rejuvenating to be a part of that in Ohio and to hear about what's happening in Canada, and it really makes a difference. So continue to watch for calls to action, continue to pay attention to the newsletters, sharing those with friends and colleagues who are curious about learning more, and stay in touch with all of our social media accounts. And when we put out those calls to action for contacting your reps, it does make a difference. Hundreds of letters have been sent in the last couple of weeks. So please keep that up.
Excellent stuff. And as I say, that all creates change. It impacts slowly and creates that wave of change. You know, change doesn't happen in a big spike. It builds and builds and builds till it becomes irresistible. And also, by the way, never underestimate, people in Ireland look to the US and our friends and family there and our cousins. And it creates a lot of good feeling for people here to know that we are not alone, that other people have got our backs.
Are working on
these issues.
That's right.
So it's great. It was great. I'm glad you had a good time in Ohio. And
it was great. Yeah, good to see everybody. We Cincinnati is a lovely place, and Covington and the whole area there. Very, very nice, very warm people.
And I heard you all behaved.
Well, I'm glad you heard that. All right. Thank you, Ciarán. We'll see you again in about a month. We really appreciate the update.
All right, Greg, and thanks for everybody for all of their continued support. Keep in touch with friends of Sinn Féin. Sign up for the newsletters and get your weekly updates.
Thank you very much.
No more.